Recently, a team of international and local archaeologists have made a significant discovery in the Republic of Kazakhstan. A clear, hand-carved Nestorian cross.
August 22nd, 2016, outside of Ulaanbaatar. This is human-carved Nestorian cross. Doesn't appear to
For the first time in Kazakhstan's history, the remains of a medieval community of Christians, called Nestorians, from the historic Church of the East was discovered that dates to the time of the infamous Chinggis Khan. So how did Christianity reach so far east? Could it be that Christianity's influence along the Silk Road was far greater than previously thought? And why did these Eastern Christians disappear? Why do we know so little about this mysterious history? The findings of 2016 were only the beginning in rediscovering and expanding our understanding of the rich religious history that stretched along the trade routes that have connected Europe and Asia for millennia, commonly known as the Great Silk Road. Marco Polo, the famous 14th century Venetian merchant, explorer, and diplomat for the renowned Kublai Khan, reported a significant number of Christians and their churches that stretched across the vast Asian continent. Although known for his exaggerations, his writings echoed the travel logs of missionary monks, who reported the same thing. The stories of Marco Polo added to the well-known rumors that swirled around medieval Europe for 2 centuries about a Christian king and kingdom east of the Islamic Empire. Prester John, as he was called by the Europeans, was believed to be a mysterious ruler who would join forces with Western Christendom and help seize control of the Middle East from the Arabs. This inscribed cross clarifies what many once considered to be myth and legend. When archaeologists discovered this stone near a mountain stream, it was not the first Christian gravestone that had been found near Usharal village. 2 years prior, in 2014, a local schoolteacher became aware of this meter-long stone. The teacher reported the stone to Kazakhstan's Institute of Archaeology, which was, at the time, under the direction of the late Professor Karl Bypakov, a well-known Kazakhstani archaeologist and expert on the Silk Road. Professor Bypakov knew that this stone was likely a grave marker connected to someone affiliated with the Christian Church of the East, and associated with the medieval city Ili Balak. In Old Persian, Ili Balak meant city along the Ili River. This unexcavated 5-square-kilometer city is partially covered by the village of Usharal, a former Soviet collective farm established in the 1930s. By that time, only parts of the old city wall, bumps in the soil, and a wide scatter of pottery is all that was left of this city. So how did we know about this ancient city?
In the year 1254, the Armenian king, Hitim I, travels from what is modern-day Turkey to Mongolia, and his purpose is to ratify a peace treaty with Chinggis Khan's son. While he travels there, he has his court chronicler record all the cities that he visits on his way there and back. One of the cities that he records was called Ili Balak. Ili Balak was located just west to a city we know called Amalik, which is on today's China-Kazakhstan border. The Ili Valley was a very important intersection of the Silk Roads.
Funded by a grant from the Society for the Exploration of Eurasia, archaeologists from Kazakhstan and the United States joined forces to excavate the city center, known as the Shakristan. Excavation of this virtually unknown city would perhaps fill in information about the lost history of Christianity in Asia, referred to in several obscure Chinese, Persian, and Armenian sources. So how did Christianity spread so far east?
Many people do not realize that just as Christianity was spreading to the west and eventually reaching Rome and even places further than that through the Apostle Paul, as recorded in the New Testament in the book of Acts, it also almost simultaneously was going eastward, specifically out of a city called Edessa, which was in eastern Syria. It continued to progress along the trade routes that we commonly call the Silk Road, reaching as early as the 2nd and 3rd century places of Azerbaijan, Armenia, those kinds of areas near the Caspian Sea. And then in the 5th century, we know, based on textual evidence, that a man by the name of Mar Barshaba, or Saint Barshaba, took the gospel message to the city of Merv, which is in modern-day Turkmenistan. It also continued to progress eastward to the far eastern parts of what was then the Persian Empire, into today's Uzbekistan and Tajikistan via the Sogdians, who were the trading middlemen of that era, as well as into the Hunnic tribes and to the Turkic tribes, which were more nomadic in the steppe areas in parts of modern Kazakhstan in about the 6th century AD. It continued to progress very rapidly, and it reached China as early as 635 AD. We know this because of a big stone stele that was discovered in the 1600s that was found in Xi'an, China, that recorded a man by the name of Elopin who took the gospel message to China in that time and got permission from the Tang Emperor of China to spread Christianity.
As the vast Russian Empire expanded during the 18th century, Russian colonial farmers entered the region of Ilibalak. And by the end of the 19th century, hundreds of Nestorian Christian gravestones were discovered. These gravestones, along with 3 Church of the East cemeteries, were eventually discovered by archaeologists throughout Kyrgyzstan, the former Soviet republic that lies southeast of Kazakhstan. What information, if any, do these gravestones give us about this former community?
The stones were examined by a prominent Semiticist, Daniel Chovalson, in St. Petersburg, and he determined they were written in Syriac. In fact, he published 2 different publications of approximately 570 stones in the 1890s. Most of the stones were dated according to what we call the Seleucid era, used by Syriac Christians. All the stones were written in Syriac script, but not all were in the Syriac language. What's interesting is that about 30 of the inscriptions that Chovalson published were wholly or partially in the Turkic language that was spoken in the region at that time. Shortly after this, in 1902, more gravestones were discovered over the border in Chinese Turkestan near the medieval city of Al-Malik. Although the inscriptions on these gravestones are typically not long, they tell us we're dealing with a Turkic Christian community that valued its connection with both the broader Syriac Christian world that it was part of, and also the surrounding Turkic culture that it lived in.
International interest in the gravestones and scholarship of Central Asia faded as political and ideological emphasis shifted with the advent of the Soviet Union. The Soviet archaeologists during the 1950s even found the remains of a church at a site near modern Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan's capital city. But the Cold War left most of these findings in obscurity. However, after the Central Asian republics gained independence in 1991, a renewed opportunity and interest emerged to examine the history of Eastern Christianity. New findings included 2 more church complexes, one at the same site in Kyrgyzstan and another in Uzbekistan at a place called Urgut. Also, a number of old Syriac documents, the language of the Church of the East, were discovered in northwest China at the turn of the 20th century. These documents were translated for the first time, adding to the understanding of the Church of the East.
The Turfan manuscript fragments constitute some of the most important evidence we have of Christianity in Central Asia. Of the 40,000 manuscript fragments in approximately 20 languages that were found, about 1,100 are Christian. Most of these are written in the Syriac script, dating from the 9th to the 13th or 14th centuries. So what we see clearly from these texts is that these Christians were theologically orthodox and shared the same core beliefs that other Christians held at this time in history. They were neither the wretched heretics that Latin Christians at the time portrayed them to be, nor were they mired in religious syncretism due to their non-Christian surroundings. In short, they were a faithful Turkic Christian community living in a part of the world where their neighbors belonged to different religions, in this case Buddhism or Manichaeism.
Historical records and archaeological evidence indicate that Christianity spanned the length of Asia from Palestine to China by the middle of the 7th century. While this general history has been known for some time, the details of the length and breadth of Christianity's reach in Central Asia has been shrouded in obscurity.
One of the big reasons that the progression of the Church of the East, or what we call commonly the Nestorian Church, is so unknown is because of what happened in the 5th century related to a controversy over the exact nature of Christ. And by that time in the Roman Empire, Christianity had become a legal religion, and thus it was also much more political. And so as the bishops began to argue this, and specifically Nestorius, who was the bishop of the church at Constantinople, this became a political fight, and Nestorius lost. He was exiled to Egypt, and his followers then fled into the Persian Empire. But we have to remember that the Church of the East had already begun spreading some 200 years before this happened into those parts of the world. And so to just simply call them the Nestorian Church is a bit of a misnomer. However, because of that label of them being heretical in the views of Christianity in the West, their historical progression was less recorded and less known. And then when it disappeared altogether out of China and Central Asia, particularly by the 15th century, it really did fade into the mists of time.
The new archaeological investigations at the Ilibalak site now provide a better understanding of the thorough saturation of Christians in the region along the Silk Road between the 6th and 14th centuries. The archaeology team has now uncovered 34 gravestones at the site of Ilibalak, including 4 with written inscriptions. One stone is written in Syriac, the liturgical language used in worship services. The other 3 are written in Old Turkic, the native language of the region, also a precursor to the languages of Uzbek, Uyghur, Kazakh, and others. So what do these gravestones tell us about the Christians of this time and place?
So the wonderful thing about the gravestones found at Ilibalak so far is their obvious connection with the graves that have also been discovered there. So what do these 4 stones tell us? Our first stone, it can be read as follows: Barshaba Kucha's son Tiles, or Tegez's son Petros the priest. It is the year of the monkey. So the language is Turkic, and the gravestone commemorates 3 generations: the deceased, his father, and his grandfather. Very typical of the Semerechia collection of gravestones is the ethnic mixture of names that we find here. The deceased names is Greek Petros, or Peter, meaning stone. The father of Petros has a Turkic name, either Tiles, meaning wished for, or Tegez, meaning smooth. The grandfather of Petros has a Syriac name, Barshaba, meaning son of the Sabbath. Barshaba actually has a double name, Barshaba Kucha, with the latter name probably a variant on the Turkic word for strength. The stone has no absolute date apart from the year of the monkey, which could be any number of years. Our second stone has a simple legend in Syriac on it. This is the grave of Shirin the believer. The female name Shirin is of Persian origin, meaning sweet, and it calls to mind the Christian queen of the Sasanian Shah of Iran, Khusro II, who reigned from the late 6th to early 7th centuries. There's no date associated with this stone whatsoever. Our third gravestone is fascinating for several reasons. Unlike the other stones, it appears to be the grave of 2 individuals. This may suggest that it could be dated to the years 1337 to 1339 when the plague swept through this part of Central Asia. However, the stone has no date, and it has the following inscription in Turkic: the grave of Barshaba Kuch, the grave of YOŠMID the priest. Is it a coincidence that this gravestone and the first one both contain the double name Barshaba Kuch, or Kucha? The second name, YOŠMID, is interesting because it comes from the Sogdian word for Sunday and is therefore related to Persian Yakshanbe. Our fourth stone is unfortunately only partial, comprising the lower right quadrant of the original gravestone. As a result, the inscription is very difficult to decipher, although there's enough to tell that at least part, if not all, the stone was in Turkic. The second line seems to contain the Syriac title Mar, meaning Lord or Saint, followed by the beginning of a name like Hananisho, meaning the mercy of Jesus. So what we can conclude from this evidence is that the Christians of Ilibalak were almost certainly indigenous to the area. While the sampling is still small, 3 of the 4 current inscriptions from Ilibalak are in Turkic. Given this fact and the names on the stones, it would be very surprising if the Christian community at Ilibalak were not predominantly Turkic speakers and thus representative of the local population.
Not only do we learn information from the cross inscriptions, the cross designs, known as iconography, tell us a story about this community of Christians.
The crosses that we see on the gravestones at Ilibalak are a particular type of cross. There's actually many different types of crosses, but it seems at Ilibalak they're emphasizing one particular kind of cross. That is a cross that has a circle in the middle between the arms and 3 steps underneath. This is known as the cross of Calvary, or the image of the true cross. There are scriptural reasons why Christians would eventually adopt the cross as a symbol of their faith. The sacrifice of Christ on the cross is what separates Christianity from all other religions. It's the idea that Jesus Christ, who was fully man and also fully God, in order to take away the sins of the world, he sacrifices himself. And in this sense, the cross is not only the instrument of Christ's death, but it's actually the supreme symbol of love. Now, eventually, in the year 327, the cross becomes a symbol also of the instrument that Jesus dies on. It's because in that year, Constantine's mother, Helena, goes to the Holy Land with the New Testament, and she tries to find these places that are listed in the Gospels. The place called Golgotha was remembered as the area where Jesus was crucified, and so she was looking for Golgotha near the city of Jerusalem. Because Helen is a Christian and she is the empress, she has the power to tear down this pagan temple to Venus, and underneath it she discovers a series of tombs, and one of these tombs is marked with the name of Jesus, and she believes that this is the tomb where Jesus was resurrected. Now, near this tomb, she also discovers a cistern, and in this cistern are 3 large pieces of wood. She has a vision, and in this vision she's told these pieces of wood were parts of the original cross that Jesus was crucified on. And so these pieces of the true cross were called the crosses of Calvary. And the actual reliquary, or the box that contained the pieces of wood, was shaped like a cross. The center of that cross was the place where they put the pieces of the relic, and then there was 3 steps below which symbolized the hill of Golgotha, or Calvary. Oftentimes you will see the reliquary called the relics of the true cross, or you will see it called the cross of Calvary. I believe the Christians living at Illibelik chose this particular type of cross as an expression of their faith because they're actually emphasizing the historicity of Christianity.
Up to 8 gravestones found by archaeologists at Illibelik contain engravings of this true cross imagery. In 2018, an exciting discovery was made. Accompanying the gravestones, archaeologists also found their graves. As of 2019, the team has excavated 81 graves comprised of 32 adults and 49 children. The entirety of the graveyard's dimensions is currently unknown, but a conservative estimate is that it may be as large as 60 meters long and 70 meters wide. Archaeologists have worked on less than 1/4 of the possible overall area, and more than 100 graves still remain unexcavated.
So far, our excavations at Illibelik have shown that all of those interred at this cemetery were from the Christian religion. The reasons that we know this is because of the homogeneous burials. What that means is that all of the burials are similar, almost the same in the way that they're laid out. Burials are very ritualistic, and this is what this demonstrates to us. The bodies are laid out with the head to the west and the feet to the east. The head is often raised with a soil pillow, which causes the face to point to the east. Some say that this may be an indication of what it says in the Bible, that they're expecting the return of Christ to come from the east and then going to the west, as he refers in Scripture. We found that the arms were often placed folded at the waist, sometimes at the chest, and in different positions if they were adults. Of course, we have the gravestones as well. So when we look at all these similar characteristics of the burials there at that cemetery at Illibelik, we know that all of the people interred there were adherents of Christianity.
Some of the bodies have personal items such as jewelry. About 1/4 of the children have had necklaces or bracelets containing small beads made of glass or semi-precious stones. For some unknown reason, many of the children and even some of the adults have a small river stone placed in either the hand or at the elbow. In some instances, there's a stone at each elbow. Less than 10% of the adults have had any accompanying items, but one particular grave was a rather major exception. Locus 89.
So when we look at the grave goods or the items that were buried with this woman in what we call Locus 89 in this particular grave, what we found was rather astounding. She had 2 silver bracelets, 2 beaded bracelets with semi-precious stones, including ocean coral, which indicates trade, because where Ely Balak is very landlocked, not anywhere near an ocean. We also found a gold ring with a turquoise stone, as well as the silver ring that matched the bracelets, specifically as it related to the 4-leaf rosette design that was on these pieces of jewelry. So what this tells us is quite significant, both connected to this person being of elite status, as well as showing the trade that was going on, as well as the symbols on her jewelry that was identifying her with Christianity.
Some of this jewelry had a broader significance. The silver bracelet with accompanying ring contains a symbol that has been found throughout Christendom, ranging between the 3rd and 15th centuries, a petal-flower combination called a 4-leaf rosette.
The 4-petal rosette is one of the earliest and most widespread motifs we find in ancient art history. It actually is first found in ancient Egypt, where it's used as a symbol of a star. And from Egypt, it spreads to Persia as well as ancient Greece. Now, in ancient times, this symbol had actually 2 meanings. When it's in the sky, it's a symbol of a star. When it's on land, it's a symbol of a flower. In a sense, you could say that a star is a flower in the sky, and a flower is a star on the earth. And in all cultures, both flowers and stars are symbols of beauty, and beauty itself is a symbol of an underlying transcendent spiritual reality that the ancients were always in search of. From the Greeks, the Romans adopted the 4-petal rosette, and we actually find this image in floor mosaics from as far east as Syria to as far west as Great Britain. Now, at the same time, the Jewish community living in the Roman Empire started to adopt different symbols to distinguish themselves from the rest of the Romans. And so Jews started to use the menorah, which is the 7-branched tree, as well as the 6-pointed star, which we call the Star of David today. And because Christianity develops from Judaism, Christians started to use their own type of tree, the symbol of the cross. You can think of the cross as like a 3-branched menorah. Also, Christians started to use the 4-pointed star, or the almond rosette. For Christians, the almond rosette could symbolize a star in the sky, a flower. It can also symbolize the cross in between the negative spaces of the petals. We call these types of images reversible images or ambiguous images because they have double meanings. To one person, they will see a flower. To another person, they will see a cross. During the Middle Ages, as Islam spreads across Asia, Christians oftentimes found themselves being persecuted. And so they may have wanted to not show their Christian faith in ways that would incur persecution. And so by wearing a rosette, other Christians would see the cross. However, to Muslims, they would see a simple flower. This allowed Christians to freely express their faith without incurring harsh persecution. So in a way, we could say the rosette is a Christian's way of expressing their faith, but it's hidden in plain sight.
The findings at Ely Balak may also shed light on another fascinating hidden mystery: the origins of the Black Death. How did the bubonic plague of the 14th century reach Europe? The big mystery? Where did the disease begin?
As far as the theories of the origins of the Black Death are concerned, there are 4 main theories. There's one theory that says it started somewhere in Western China. There's another theory which says it started somewhere in Western Siberia. There's another theory saying it started somewhere in the Caspian. And there's a 4th theory, which I find the most convincing one, which says it started somewhere in Central Asia. What's really interesting is that in 1338, you have an outbreak of plague in northern Kyrgyzstan. There are two Nestorian Christian cemeteries where you have really remarkable spike in the number of graves. So about 25% of all the tombstones have been dated to a single year, 1338, though some of the tombstones actually state very clearly that this person or that person died because of the plague. The plague started spreading westwards along the northern branch of the so-called Silk Road into the Golden Horde territories, and finally it appears in 1346 in Crimea. We have this famous episode about what some historians refer to as the first instance of biological warfare. So you have the Tatars fighting the Genoese in the fortress of Kaffa, and at some point you have the outbreak of plague in the Tatar camp. So the Tatars started actually catapulting their own bodies to the Genoese side. The Genoese just ran away for their lives, took it to the galleys and sailed away, but they also imported plague this way.
Most scholars hypothesize that plague spread to the general populations of Europe by way of flea-infested rats on the trade ships. The results were devastating. Since so many of the Christian gravestones in Kyrgyzstan come from the year 1338, one of the years of the Black Plague, and since 6 of those stones from that year state that the person died from the plague, some scholars speculate this is one of the reasons Christians of the eastern half of Central Asia disappeared. Could genetic analysis provide the answer to the origins of Europe's Black Death? The way to find out is through testing skeletal DNA.
First, we identify the collection of skeletons that may belong to a plague context. Then we drill into the dental pulp of a skeleton. And the reason is because teeth are the least destructible parts of a human body. This is also one part of the body where blood remains preserved. We drill there, then we extract an ancient DNA, and we screen the same ancient DNA, ancient human DNA, to see if there's any trace of plague bacterium there. Once we confirm that there is any plague bacterium trace, we sequence same plague DNA, then we compare it to other plague genomes.
And by comparing to other plague genomes, we establish the evolutionary position of the same genome in relation to other genomes from other contexts. And this is how we could determine the geographic origins of the Black Death.
Ancient DNA analysis could also provide study of potential pathogens, diet, and answer one basic question.
So the basic question is, who were these people? Where did they come from? What was their ethnicity? Do we know anything about these Christians that lived in Ili Balak? We know that they spoke Turkic language, the precursor to languages like Uzbek, Kazakh, and Uyghur. We know that their worship, the language that they worshipped in, was Syriac because of the connections that it had to Syria and its spread of Christianity across that region. But we are almost certain that these people were not some sort of nomads coming from somewhere outside the region, but that they were indigenous. The graves themselves tell us, based on the forensic evidence or the bones that we've looked at, give us an idea that some of these people had Asian ethnicity based on the makeup of their teeth and also on the facial and cranial features. But the big answer comes from the DNA analysis. We have taken DNA samples, the molars of their teeth, many of them, and so now we are awaiting analysis. We are having to wait, to be patient, to find out who are these people, who are their descendants, who were they the ancestors of. We've got some small clues right now, but we await for further analysis.
Although very preliminary analysis has begun, until such costly and complicated analysis can occur, we are still left to speculate. While the mystery of exactly who these Christians of the late Middle Ages were remains, it is igniting a fresh appreciation for history within Kazakhstan and around Central Asia, both internationally, as characterized by a visit of international scholars to the site in the summer of 2019, as well as with the local villagers who have participated in every dig for the past 4 years. They now have a fresh understanding of a history right at their doorstep.
Осы проектте мен қатысып жатырмын 2016 жылдан бастап. Және осы бүкіл историяның, тарихтың бір бөлігі бізге ашылу бастады. Және осы бір институт бізде түсіндіру бастады, қандай мағынасы бар. И біз осы проект арқылы, Ili Balak арқылы біз білу бастадық. әсіресе бізде олардың діндері қандай болды, мәдениет қандай болды, және олардың салт дәстүрлері қандай болды, біз біле бастадық. Аудару арқылы, анализдер арқылы біз осы тарих жалпы очарауда Илибалық проект арқасында біз тарих қазір осылай үлкен жігер алдық. Осы егер біз тарих білсек, бізге көп нәрсе ашылып, біз осы өз тарихымызға басқаша көру бастаймыз.
The findings are also showing the complex, multi-layered religious and cultural diversity that characterized this region along the Silk Road for 800 years.
During the Middle Ages, really for a period of almost 700 years, many of the locations along the trade routes of what we call the Silk Road had a multiplicity of religions and confessions. Of course, there was Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Manichaeism, and what some people call Tengriism, which is a sort of shamanistic, animistic worship of the sky god Tengri, which was worshipped by both the Turkic tribes and the Mongols. All of those could have been found, in some cases, living very close together, in some cases in the same city. And this is recorded both in the textual record as well as the archaeological record. And this was the case in Central Asia all the way up until the 15th century.
We often think about Christianity in modern Central Asia as being purely a Western religion which has been imported there by colonial powers, but in fact became an indigenous religion, as we can see from the testimony of the Turfan manuscripts and the Ilibalik gravestones. The truth is that these manuscripts and gravestones show us that there were Christians there a lot earlier than the colonial period, and not just Christians who had migrated there from elsewhere, but Christians who had grown up in the Turkic culture speaking a Turkic language and still living as followers of Jesus Christ.
Projects such as those at Ilibalik demonstrate how international cooperation can expand our understanding, reveal more of a lost history, be astounded at the reach of religious expression, and understand that previous generations interacted on levels perhaps underestimated in the present. It also tells us that some of the impossible-to-believe stories that many are certain is mere fantasy often carry far more truth than we are willing to acknowledge. While Prester John may not have existed as he was imagined, continued historical and archaeological research is revealing that a realm and culture of Christians could be found throughout the Middle Ages, in many, if not most, of the cities along the old Silk Road.